Right. What about, obviously version 1 is still alive, but their issue is they now play the match where if people go back to that episode, the two teams we had getting out of the bracket were Cloud9 and V1, and spoiler, one of them is going to go out in second to last place. So what about this matchup? Because it gives us a chance now. We talked a bit about version 1, maybe do the Cloud9 side, right? As far as I can tell, Peak, a lot of other people had a similar opinion to Geo. Like Cloud9 looked like the best team at that point in time going into that matchup. So how do they end up in this scenario, and do they prevail against version 1?
I don't think they will. I think they will be easy to scout because from what I've seen when, especially Cloud9 faced Optic, Cloud9, they rotated between, I'll take Haven as an example. They rotated between having the Omen, the one with, well, yeah, you just send out the smokes from a long range and then have him lurk basically on C-long or something. And you have Killjoy set up a turret in mid and then pushes where the turret is going to look. Like they kind of overlap their own utility and they are redundant to a big extent. And it's very easy to stop that. So if version 1 scouts them and just sees, okay, they are not really efficient here. And yeah, I forgot even to mention what they rotated between, but to the other part. But the other part is where they have everyone walking together except Killjoy, and it's basically a ranked strategy. It feels like. So for me, it feels like it's super easy to just look at that. Okay, if we find the Omen, we know that if Killjoy is lurking and we don't hear Omen steps or we don't even see any Omen, then he's going to be lurking as well somewhere. And usually he's on the edges of the map, and then he makes his calls. Like I believe what's the name? Vanity. He's the in-game leader, right? So
yes.
As far as I understand, they don't have a shared role, and when he goes for those positions on the side, I guess he's using it as a leeway to think a bit more, because there's no point in lurking as Omen there. And you can set up your stuff as Killjoy, use her as a sentinel. So if you get alerted that someone is coming on C-long, you can be in mid, keep control there, and now you can tell your teammates who are maybe over at A or maybe over at mid, okay, someone is coming here, let's do this. And you don't have to basically remove one body and leave it up to chance or leave it up to duels where, okay, this one guy is going to face, well, we have a 3v3 or 3v4 or something and losing the fight, and then you have to run in with utility you don't have anymore, or maybe the Omen is too late on the smokes, or yeah, whatever. You don't have the flash as well when you play him there. And if, yeah, version 1, I can't repeat what I'm saying here, but if version 1 just watch the match versus Optic, they can stop them completely, and I feel like they can. And
because the game plan, they've sort of seen the blueprint of how you beat them.
Yeah, I feel like the players in version 1 are kind of high energy, and they are the sort of players that will go above and beyond of just, okay, let's think inside of the box here, and they will come up with these weird ideas, or we can stop this, or we can do this like tiny thing here. And
okay,
I feel like when you're an old team especially, you kind of disregard that type of thinking. You kind of set in your way, and that's something that bothered Cloud9 in Champions, for example, where they just had so much focus on dueling, so much focus on the duelists, and not really as much focus on the team combos and how you position with all the roles in the map.
Okay.
So yeah.
I think one of the things that I would find concerning if I were Cloud9 is the fact that in the game against Optic, Cloud9 and Optic swap maps. So like Cloud9 took Optic's map, Optic took Cloud9's map. And I think that if you come into a series, and now you could argue, of course, Cloud9 actually lost their map not as egregiously as Optic lost their map. So there is that to consider. But I think that if you go into a series knowing that the maps that you have chosen and that you are ostensibly really strong on, actually you couldn't hold your own on, that's a little bit concerning, especially as undoubtedly version 1 are going to ban Breeze, right? I think, that's what Optic did. Everyone knows that Cloud9 are really good on Breeze. And I think that it would be a really smart idea from version 1 to follow in those footsteps to deny that to Cloud9, because I think that would likely be a win for C9 on that map. But on Haven, which was Cloud9's map pick against Optic, it went into overtime, only one overtime. But like the thing that I find also a little bit of a concern about that map is that this was a map that when Optic played against version 1 on it, that was when Optic first brought this neon strategy that got countered by version 1 and actually didn't end up working. And this was a conversation that we actually had on one of the episodes we did here, was, are Optic going to bring that back and like make some adaptations to it, or are they just kind of going to leave it? And the answer was they did bring it back. They brought it back for this series against Cloud9, and they did make adaptations to it. Now, if Cloud9 struggled against that composition, which version 1 were able to successfully counter when Optic brought it out the first time, that's another layer of concern that I have. I think the other thing as well is you have to consider that throughout the course of this series, like, the two players who were doing really well consistently were Leaf and Zephyr. And that's not a bad thing, but I'm always think it's good to have a healthy dose of skepticism when the best performing players in your team are always the duelists, because I think that sometimes that can be indicative of there not being enough done on like the support end of the team, which arguably is the most important part of whether the team is going to succeed, at least in this era of Valorant, where like setups and how you use your utility is super important. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm like super like low on Cloud9. I mean, I'm such a huge fan of this team, but they didn't do as well against Optic as I expected them to. And I think that, yeah, like that combined with what Peak was saying just about potentially those blueprints have been laid out and they can be read into, especially with, you know, Vanity on you know, kind of new agents. I think that as an individual, he made some good individual plays on Omen, but that doesn't mean that they were as good as they could have been for the rest of the team. And that's potentially worrying.
Yeah, if you take someone like FNS, for example, he's the one shot calling for Optic. The guy top frags when he's playing on Cypher. You need to have a massive multitasking.
He popped off that series. Like, he was actually on something. on Ascent, FNS went wild. Yeah,
I mean, he has been like that consistently since he joined Envy, and that's one of the reasons why I enjoy watching him, because he has this like very logical way of playing, and it's sort of like a software engineer when he's playing, well, when he's thinking, I guess. And that paired with the gun mechanics and the positioning and the movement, that's what you want from Vanity as well. But I think maybe your like a lot of the what's it called, compensation happens on the duelist end, I feel like, for Cloud9. And NA, for example, they used to rely a lot on the duelist. Like, for example, Optics, they still do sometimes. They have Ye going on these very greedy angles with a chamber, and they don't have to do that. Like, they can get solid wins, but I guess that's also a type of it depends on the culture of the team and the attitude of the players and so on. But yeah, if you're Cloud9 and you would happen to see, okay, I don't need to do all the thinking in game, and you can prepare like lots of thinking. Well, maybe Vanity does, but your prep work is the issue. If the time spent thinking in game takes over and kind of lose the mechanics and so on, because I don't think it's that difficult to adapt to the in-game leader role, but also have the mechanics, because if you're efficient, you don't need to do that much thinking, and you just autopilot pretty much the talking, the plans and so on. And yeah, I don't know where I wanted to go with that, but I think that's the difference, at least between the two teams, and why Optic lost and why version 1 can figure out Cloud9.
I think that right now, like, obviously this conversation about like where the value from the controllers is coming is really prevalent, just because people are using new controllers. Some teams are deciding that they want to go with Omen more, some teams are going with Brim more. And I think that even though it isn't a direct IGL versus IGL comparison from Cloud9 versus Optic, because obviously their IGLs are on different roles, I think that it is really important, if we look at the Ascent, which was the third map in that series, compare the performance of Vanity and the performance of Marved. Marved on the Brimstone had an excellent game, and it felt like he was always getting value round over round, and he was also doing a really good job of individually shutting down some of those most valuable players from Cloud9. So like Zeppa, for example, would make an engage into the A site on a Sen, and he would use a null command, the team would shoot him, so like he's down, and then they use this orbital strike so that he couldn't be rezzed. And it's like really good, like sublime usage of the new control, and not that an orbital strike is new, but like of these now meta controllers utility that Marv was doing a great job of. That, yeah, it felt, I think it's fair to say it felt like there wasn't as much that we could say about Vanity along the same arm. I also think that in the last 2 maps of that series, you could start to see like Cloud9 getting a little bit uncomfortable. And for me, like where that really manifested itself, and I'm curious to know, Peak, if this was something you noticed as well, but it felt like a lot, especially on their defenses, they would have really aggressive defenses. Like, for example, on Fracture, they had like kind of a neat little setup down in like A hall where there were like 3 of the players. But the problem is a lot of the attackers were set up to come down through dish and drop. They take the entire site together, and then the defenders just kind of keep pushing A hole, and it felt like sometimes, and on Ascent there were like similar like B main pushes at times where it almost felt like they were just chasing that opening kill. Like they wanted something, so they would keep pushing defensively and sort of get a little bit too far in that. And for me, like that felt kind of strange to watch, because I feel like throughout the course of the stage and the Cloud9 that we know, like the post Vanity Cloud9, like they always seem to look like they have a lot of control over their decision making, and they always seem to look fairly composed. And this was like one time where I just noticed these plays every now and then where I was thinking like, this doesn't always look super composed. Like it does look a little bit like they're uncomfortable and a tad kind of desperate to just claw that back. And I think that the pressure of being down in the lower bracket, going against the team that, let's be honest, most people thought was going to be the grand final matchup. I certainly did, V1 versus Cloud9. And this is their last opportunity. Otherwise, they're not making Masters. Like, how are they going to deal with that pressure if we can already see some of the lack of composure in the game against Optic?
Well, I feel like this is it's typical for, I feel like it's typical for any teams, but also for EU teams, of course, mainly for these teams that are kind of newer or more. Not in the same, I don't compare them to this, but like mismanaged teams, for example, where you have a team that doesn't really know what to do, and they have no way to like funnel down, like imagine like a ton of information coming in, and you have like a funnel. That's like for a good team, they have like funnel, and they have like a tube that the information just goes through, forced in there, and then you sort it out. But when you're C9, for example, in the third map, you try to kind of sorry, I was going on a different tangent there, but you kind of try to set the tone for the match, and you try to dominate the other team, and you try to get into their head, and you do things that you don't need to. I feel like that's just, well, they have experience, but it comes with inexperience. Like you don't have the same type of tone to the teams that have played, for example, 2 years together, or in other games where you're like a rookie player. You're kind of aggressive, you take risk, you go greedy plays, you do things that you don't really have to. And then if we take Stu 2K, for example, he's a perfect example, doing all these things, and then later on, super strict, super composed, not really risking things because you don't have to. And that's something that they haven't done yet. They haven't grown into that. And I think It's because they're young, and especially because of how the NA culture in Valorant is. Like, it's a very celebrity oriented, where you don't really see the same type of mindset as Gambit or let's say Ascend, where you have more, how do you call it, logical type of looking at it, and not really impulsive and emotional way of looking at it. And I think that's what they really try to do. They try to just, let's get them, let's show them basically who we are, and then it didn't really work out.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.